include prepared questions and then questions from the floor. It will approximately take 1 hour. If your questions have not been answered, the legislators will be available for a short time after 11 o'clock for you to personally ask them. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Senator Mark Singabart and Representative Brian Best, and we'll start with opening comments.
Are we turned on? Good. Well, welcome everyone. It's great seeing you again. Last week was a pretty short week, as you might add, I think, for the legislature. Monday was the caucuses, so we had last Monday off, and then it was a blizzard after that, so I didn't actually get back to the Capitol until Wednesday, and Wednesday was a busy day. I think it was the busiest day I've ever had during the session, because I was on 3 subcommittees that day. Subcommittees, as you're probably aware, is where a bill starts in the legislature. It has to go through a 3-member subcommittee and get voted out of that subcommittee before it'll go before a full committee, which then it has to pass that full committee, and then it can go to the floor for debate. Really, it has to go through the majority leader before it goes to the floor for debate. So the 3 bills that I dealt with, 2 of them were human service bills, one of which was to increase the amount of salary for people that do employment services for people with disabilities. And the reason that was necessary was because last year, it was in last year's bill and it passed last year's bill, but the Department of Human Service, now imagine this, sometimes departments don't spend the money where the legislature intended them to spend it. They had just put it in their regular funds and hadn't moved that where we thought it should go. So the bill itself just reinforces the fact that money, which was an extra $750,000, as I recall, to go to employment services that come through the mental health departments in the county. So another one was, I gotta think here, was an appropriation bill to pay for the Medicaid that didn't get budgeted for last year in last year's budget. Every year, the legislature tries to hit a medium point on what we think the Medicaid bill will be for the next year. And we can either pick high or low or in the middle. And when you pick in the middle, that means that you're guessing that the bills will be down for the coming year. Well, do you think the bills ever go down for Medicaid every year? No. So guess how far we missed it? About $80 million is how far we missed it. So this is a pretty major appropriation that we have to do to get out of the current fiscal year. So I was, our Human Resource Committee had to deal with that. And that's probably one of the things that'll be on the agenda for this coming week. We actually have 2 days scheduled for floor debate next week. And I'm not sure what's going to come up during that floor debate, because the majority only announces that about 24 hours before the bill actually comes to the floor. So, but the things I'm hoping to see next week are school supplemental aid is one thing that I hope to see come out next week, and probably this supplemental bill that I just talked about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Best and give him some time. But he's ready.
I'm ready.
He's ready.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
There's a couple of bills that I got to work on last week in subcommittee, and one thing that was kind of interesting, I drove down to Des Moines Monday night after the caucus, and got down there and thought, man, it's not so bad down here, and I drove in Tuesday morning and there was nobody there. And then when I got back last night, I couldn't believe how much snow Glidden got and how much different it was here from what it was in Des Moines. Des Moines didn't get hit very hard at all, actually. But a couple of things I worked on down there last week. One that I think is a really good bill is Senate File 453, which was passed over from the Senate last year. And we worked on it last year and passed it on a subcommittee, but it's It's a bill for telepharmacy. And right now, what we've got in Iowa is a situation where the pharmacist has to physically be in the pharmacy in order to fill a prescription. But what we're having is a lot of the small communities, especially in rural Iowa, they can't keep a brick and mortar pharmacy in their town because they can't get a pharmacist. And so what this allows a pharmacist in a different location through the telemedicine to actually see the patient who's coming in for the medication, and he can give him instructions, and he can see the actual medication that's being measured out, and so it's very safe, and I think it's a great idea for rural Iowa. We don't have enough probably of any of the medical profession. We're a little bit low on doctors. Obviously, psychiatrists and pharmacists are starting to help that too. So it's going to be, I think, a very good bill, and so I'm happy with that. Also, I am the chairman of a firearms bill that is going through right now. I'm chairman of that committee, having to do with firearms on ATVs when you're on your own property or when you're on somebody else's property. So that's a bill that I'm actually managing, and we passed it through committee on Thursday. So those are a couple of things that I'm working on right now. Also, I have been working on a bill for school transportation, and that's something that I've been working on for about the last year. We actually did get a bill draft number on it last week. Basically what that does is it pays the difference between the average cost per pupil and what your school has to pay. So if you're at $900 per student and the state average is $350, the state would pay that down for that school. Because what's happening now is that's just a per pupil cost that goes into the classroom that the schools with high transportation costs never get reimbursed for. So I think it's an inequity. I know they're working on something right now that would allow you to use SAVE funds to do that, and Ron Jorgensen, our chairman, is working on that. The only problem that I have with that is it doesn't take care of the inequity. All it does is it allows you to take money out of it to put in transportation, so it's not really reimbursing the school for that inequity. So that's something that I'm working on also. With that, I guess, do you want us just to go on to the next thing?
Sure, before we begin the prepared questions, there are restrooms through these doors, and so feel free to use those if you need to. The first prepared question, or what are your opinions on privatizing Medicaid?
Okay, that's been very contentious in the House, and it's becoming a little bit of a political football, I believe, between the Senate and the House, with your Democrats in the Senate and the House, and you know, I kind of feel like it's a tough one because I think the governor probably has the right idea. Medicaid is getting out of control, and we have to do something to try to rein in those costs. At the same time, I think there's a lot of frustration. Mark and I just had this conversation down in Audubon where how I found out about privatization of Medicaid was I read it in the Des Moines Register. And that happened about a year ago when this whole thing started coming down. And I think it's something that's going to be a necessity, but I do have some fears about how fast it'll roll out. And but I'll be honest with you, I think that ship has left the harbor, and we're going to have to figure out a way to make it work. That's where we're at. So I'm going to do what I can to make sure that everybody, there's two concerns. I think that these are basic concerns that you always have with this. Is you always want to make sure that the folks that need the services still have the access, and that MCOs don't become a bridge to those, or not a bridge, actually a barrier. You don't want the MCOs to become a barrier for those patients who need those services. And also what you need to do is make sure that they're not realizing the savings by lowering the allowables to the providers so that they're so low that for-profits can't make a profit, non-profits still have to have enough money to make those systems work. And so those are two of the things that I think we really have to watch out for at the state level to make sure that we hold the MCOs accountable that there's still folks out there to get those services that they need. I'll let Mark answer that question now.
Thanks. The question is, why modernize Medicaid? As Brian says, we had a very lengthy discussion down in Audubon this morning over this issue. And Brian is right in that we found out about it via the newspaper. There was not a bill last year that was passed by either house to modernize Medicaid. It was an initiative from the governor to the Department of Human Service to rein in the spending that's been snowballing on health and human service expenditures, which mainly is Medicaid expenditures, okay? And so the plan that 41 other states have gone to kind of rein in the spending increases is through privatization of the management of that care through what is called managed care organizations. And so last year we went through a process where our request for proposals or a request for a bid from private companies to manage that care for us in Iowa. Have we ever done this before? Yes, we have. We had a group called Magellan that has been the managed care service for these services in the past. Their contract has ended the 1st of January, and the 3 MCOs that we currently have were chosen by the DHS, Department of Human Service, after they submitted bids and plans on how they were going to set up shop. That's been a very slow process, and there's been a lot more questions than answers. And the one thing that I've heard more from, email-wise, on any issue is this Medicaid modernization. So it's a real, I actually think it's kind of a train wreck at this point. But I think Brian's comment that maybe the ship has left the port is probably true, because we're set up now. If the Centers for Medicaid Services approves the plan, they delayed the plan, which was supposed to start January 1. They delayed it till March 1st. So we're coming up on that deadline pretty quickly, and they still have to approve the plan for March 1st. So they may come back and tell us that the plan's still not ready. And the basic problem with not being ready for January 1 was these managed care organizations didn't have enough contracts with hospitals and nursing homes and doctors to set up a program that would work. So the governor did come out with a news release on Friday or Thursday that said there are way more doctors now signed up than there were under the old plan. I think there was only like 6,000 doctors signed up to be Medicaid doctors in the past, and now it's up to 7,500 or 8,000, somewhere in that vicinity. So they said there would be more care for people on Medicaid than there was in the past, because there are more doctors signed up. So that's a good news. So whether this thing actually is going to happen on March 1st is kind of up in the air yet, because we still haven't heard from CMS whether they approved our plan. So I wish there was an easy answer to this. There isn't. One of the things I was kind of told people in Audubon just this morning was the fact that, well, there's fraud involved with putting everything the government's involved in. If it's income taxes, I mean, there's fraud. You just name it. There's a ability to if you have a pot of money, let's think of it this way, and you can bill for it, and you have a computer, that now you can come up with a long list of things that you could bill for, just as an example. And with a computer, guess what? Every month when you're billing, that same thing you billed for last year will immediately pop up for you. So this long list of expenses just grows and grows and grows, and pretty quickly you've ran through the money that you had allotted in your budget to pay for those things. So does it happen intentionally? Well, of course it happens intentionally occasionally, but a lot of it is just sort of built into the system. And so how do you get control of that? What's the best way to control that? I would wager to you that a for-profit entity managing that system has way closer scrutiny on how that money is being spent than one that just relies on a budget increase on a yearly basis, which is what DHS would do. So modernization has some benefits in the fact that I think it's the only entity out there that probably can get a handle on the fraud and the missed billing that goes into Medicaid. So that's my opinion on that, and that's the short answer. I know there's a lot longer answers, but next question, I guess.
Our next prepared question is, does the legislature have adequate funds to backfill all of the exemptions to the real estate taxes it's created, including veterans, commercial backfill, etc.?
Short answer is yes. One of the things the governor last year vetoed a lot of things that we thought he wouldn't veto. And why does he do that? Well, because first thing out of his mouth in his State of the State address was that Iowa was rated, third best managed state in the union. Well, what does that really mean? That means that we actually have money we have reserves. Most states are broke. So the fact that Iowa has a reserve shows that we're pretty well managed, because the ones that aren't well managed are broke. So, but I believe especially that we've created a lot of tax credits over the years, which lowers the amount of tax that individuals have to pay. But I guess what we're guilty of worse is the fact that whenever we've given a tax break, we've always said, well, we're going to backfill it. And the example here is that we cut commercial property valuations here a couple of years ago. And what does that mean to counties and cities? It means that they're, well, guess what? The state says, you're not going to suffer because we're going to backfill that. We're going to replace that for you. But the problem is we had no way other than reserves to backfill. That's probably what prompts this question. Is there money to keep backfilling all the things we promised? And at this point, yes, there is, but it's rapidly depleting that large surplus that we've known we've had for a few years. So that's my short answer for that question. You can clean it up if you can, Brad.
I think you touched on it pretty well. The only thing I would add is I know in the House there is, they absolutely want to continue to keep the problems that they made, that they would backfill. And so with that, there's not a whole lot I can add to what Mark said.
All right, we'll begin questions from the floor. If anyone from the floor has a question, please identify yourself to the legislators. State your name and the organization you represent, if you represent one. Be sure that your question is relevant to a bill or issue that the legislators are able to act on. This is a time for questions, not a time to make a statement or for lobbying purposes. If you have something that you'd like to discuss without the question, we would request that you save that and speak with the legislators after the forum. So now we'll take questions from the floor.
Don Granstrup, Carroll. Where has that come from? If we have enough of it, where is it? Where has it come from?
Sure. The question was, where does the money come from for the backfill? And it's at this point, it's coming out of that $900 million rainy day fund that we set aside. And where does that come from? That comes from more money coming into the state's budget because the state is doing well than what was actually budgeted for in a given year. A few years ago, that grew quite rapidly because our economy was doing so well. And rather than just spend that in the next budget, we have a 99% budget limitation that the House has pretty much rammed through the last few years that has kept us from growing by spending that money that we hadn't planned on it. The Revenue Estimating Conference tries to predict every year what the revenues will be for the next year, and that's what you base your budget off for the next year. Now, if they miss that, that grows your surplus, and that's where that money comes from at this point. So it's a good thing to have. That's why we're probably ranked third in management, because we've been able to hold it together. So I hope that's an easy answer. Any other question?
I'm going to circle back to the Medicaid issue. You know, a lot's been talked about the expansion of Medicaid as far as the increased cost, but you all have expanded Medicaid. The numbers have increased because of the expansion of Medicaid, because of providers. And I really do think that you're absolutely right, Senator, that 40 states have gone into Medicaid managed care, but the acceleration on this and the lack of consultation from the legislative side is outrageous. And I really do hope both of you take a look at this as moving along. And one of the issues that's real important to us is voluntary to the process. Nonprofit hospitals have subjected themselves to a taxation in essence to gain more funding from the federal government. And now we're looking at giving that money from nonprofit hospitals to for-profit insurance companies. And hopefully you all are taking a good hard look at where those funds are going to and look at how the funding mechanism to these for-profit managed care organizations is working out.
Very good point. There's a lot of work being done at this point to figure out. There was a bill last year that set up an oversight committee. That didn't function too well. I know the people that I've visited with that have been on it, and it's turned into a more partisan group than really is workable. So I think we're still trying to set up an oversight committee that will really sit down with the MCOs and ask them the questions they don't want to be asked either, so that we can figure out, because we don't want the money to just go into a for-profit insurance company rather than go to the people of Iowa. So exactly. I dropped this in the ear of last year when we regionalized, we had this term called the clawback. Does anybody remember that term? It was money that the regions they thought was going to reap a harvest, because now the expansion of Medicaid has given insurance to people that had no way of funding their health costs. And I don't know where this idea came from, but they were sure that regions were going to just reap in big bucks, and so we wanted to claw it back. I don't know where that term comes from. It's an ugly term. I think of bears when I think of clawback. We're going to claw that money back from those regions. Way too much money if we don't. And so that same fear sort of fits that same program. Maybe we need to claw back some of the money that goes to the MCOs if they're obviously not fulfilling their part of the bargain and making it. I mean, if they're getting it because they're really managing things much better, that's a tough thing. You got to have people that really are accountants to understand whether they're really telling you this is the truth or not. But that's the plan, is to have even a better oversight committee at this point. So.
Yeah, I think it'd be really good if we could get providers, subscribers of Medicare, and legislatures, nonprofits, and legislatures together to just kind of have roundtable discussions and find out what's going on. But as a provider myself of medical care, I think we all kind of believe that we could have done a lot better job of kind of letting us know and letting us on the table so we could have some say in what we do. It's kind of a lack of transparency right now.
Excuse me, who's the driving force of this in Des Moines?
Of the MCOs,
Yeah.
or of the new managed care? Well, obviously it's the governor's plan, and I think he really wanted to do this, and I think his intentions are good. It does grow. At the rate it's growing, there's not going to be anything left for anybody. So I mean, I think the intentions are good. We just got to figure out a way to make it work. I keep coming up with a statistic and how many Medicaid recipients we had even 5 years ago compared to now. Do you know what the number is?
When we expanded Medicaid, there were about 350,000 people in the Medicaid system. When we expanded it, we made it much easier to be eligible for Medicaid, and that has grown that to 560,000 Iowans now that are eligible for Medicaid. So,
Yeah, and I just want to make sure everybody realizes we're not making a judgment here to say that we have too many people on Medicaid. I'm not saying that at all. I don't think Mark is either, but it does create a lot of it creates a lot of issues that you have to deal with, and slowing the growth down is important. The growth of the costs, and so the efficiencies are important also.
Dr. Curry, I've worked on quite a few state programs dealing with the dental component, and what I see, I think carries over very easily to the medical. This year, $80 million shortfall, and we added 200,000 more people on, and so what we're going to do is we're going to change the name of the organization and how we present it. But the reality of life is that I had a young dentist call me the other day, a recent graduate, and he goes up to a nursing home and provides care. Now his actual cost for getting his operation at the office was $74. He was repairing a denture for a patient. And that was the actual lab cost that he has to pay somebody else. And he's reimbursed $46. Well, they say it's going to change, but you know, if you take the math, if you go from 360 to 560, and you're 80 million in hole when you start, how many dollars do you have to lose in each patient before you break even?
In other words, you're going to see if you can make it up the volume, right?
Well, that's what they're asking. That's what they're asking us providers to do. But if we lose money on every one we see and we double the numbers, now you've doubled the number, not doubled, but the number of participating ones that have signed up. And I'm involved with wellness program, which is the dental counterpart of the medical. And I can tell you we have tremendous more providers that signed up. But the reason was they were getting reimbursed at 30% of their costs. Now they're getting reimbursed at 60% of their costs, but their overhead 70%. And so these numbers that they're throwing around, the reality of it is you're not going to solve the problem. And then when you bring in for-profit companies that have horrible, dismal records of their own integrity, it goes back to, it's just a question of, you know, where's the fraud come from? So.
You know, your point's well taken, honestly.
John?
John Rockelsby, I represent myself. That's a hard thing to do, by the way. One last question on the Medicare thing. Why, and we haven't mentioned that this morning, why is the Department of Human Services expanding their staff and you're hiring a for-profit case manager, and you're telling me that DHS couldn't do the job, so now we have a for-profit organization, plus we're increasing the staff at the state level? This makes absolutely no sense, period.
I don't know that we're expanding the staff. If you've got numbers, I'd like to see that.
I will email them to you,
The
sir.
complaint I hear mostly is they're not reimbursing us. They're not even sure nobody's taking their calls. And, you know, the IME, the Iowa Medicaid Enterprise, that was the other local state-run bureaucracy that oversees Medicaid, is basically depopulated their employment, their people, as well as Magellan. So I'd like to see that. If you've read that somewhere, or somebody's come out with that, I'd like to see that information. So, because that makes no sense at all.
I wasn't aware of that either, John, so, yeah, please give us the email.
Okay.
Send us it.
Other questions from the floor?
There was a gentleman that just left that had a question for both of us before we started this morning. was about the 179 IRS coupling of the income tax code, the Iowa code with the federal income tax code. Now, I brought this up 2 weeks ago. I think it was the last point I made that morning. That bill to couple has passed out of the House, and I think it had 2 weeks ago. And I'm hoping it comes up this week because I think we need to maintain that. The governor didn't want to maintain it for this year because what that does is puts about another $100 million into the federal coffers. And I think he wanted some of that to go to school aid. And the problem there is that if we do that this year, where do we come up with $100 million for next year if we couple? And so if we uncouple and take the money, we ramped up the budget for next year another $100 million. So if we don't, one of the candidates wanted to use zero balance budgeting. Does Iowa use zero balance budgeting? No, we start from what you had last year, and then we either status quo and you get the same amount, or you get an increase. If you had a zero balance budget where you had to go back at zero when you start and justify every expense, that might solve that problem. Just my thoughts.
Carroll?
I'm Carroll and I represent myself. As a practitioner in government, not at the level that you are at, but in municipal government, we are obligated to solve problems. And I'm not saying you're not solving problems, but continuously I hear about the problem, but I don't hear anyone moving toward how do you manage this. If you have a problem with the number of people that are getting on the program, in my perspective, you either have to shift some other monies into that. You have to do something. What are you hearing among your caucuses? What are you hearing among your committees? What are you hearing among your houses? What are you hearing from the governor? How do you manage this? I mean, we can all talk about how difficult it is. When are we going to manage it?
That's an easy one, Brian. Can I start?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that.
It's very difficult to give you a finite answer on that. I think the MCOs obviously is the first step in managing that. Another thing that we do is I think we have to get really sure that the ones that are utilizing the services, any state services and funding, are eligible for those things too. So I think we have to make sure that we keep the program functioning and make sure that we don't get carried away. I mean, the question is, we want everybody to have these services, and without some type of an efficiency like what we're doing with the MCOs, I think it's going to be really tough. So I got to say that I think that's probably the most important thing we can do, but we have to keep it under control. So we're watching out for the 3 MCOs to make sure they're doing the job right. And I'll tell you what, anybody who's got any ideas on how to manage it, I'm all ears, because I don't have all the answers. I have very few when it comes to this. This thing happened so fast that I think we're all just, we've got this laid on our plate. Now we're trying to figure out what to do next.
My short answer is that this expansion of Medicaid occurred the first year I was down there, and I'm not one to point fingers and say I told you so, but I told you so. At the first assignment I received is the Human Resource Committee, which deals with public health, health and human service, and there's a couple other ones, veterans and other things. I'm the ranking member on the budget sub, which we both serve on. And what happens when you're a ranking member is you're usually the spokesman for your caucus if the bill's on the floor, okay? So the night of on the floor when the vote was to come up for expanding Medicaid, I had the honor of being able to recommend whether I think that this should pass or not. And my first year in the Senate, this was a rather heart-rendering thing to do, but I was pretty sincere about the fact that if we expand this, that we're taking care of the people right now that really need our help. These are individuals with disabilities and that need public assistance to survive. If not, they're homeless people living under bridges. And by expanding it, we expanded it to men were never eligible for Medicaid before this. But we raised the poverty level, and men all of a sudden became eligible. And now there's a whole group of people that are on there that could survive if they were given the right motivation. Well, so I said, I can't recommend we vote for this because I'm fearing for the people that really need our help. We may run out of money and not be able to help the people that really need it. And but it passed anyways on a party line vote pretty much. But so I'm saying, I guess I told you so. This could happen 3 years ago, and nobody was listening. So okay, I'll take another question.
Jean Ludwig, I just represent myself. Isn't this expansion of Medicaid a result of Obamacare? Isn't that why this is
Well,
about?
it was like a perfect game plan, because what's the next thing after we expanded it? The next year came the Affordable Care Act, which we all know is not affordable anymore, because all those people that signed up, the bills went up the second year, and now they can't afford $250 for a family of four per month either. They couldn't afford, they were, the first year they got it for $50 a month, which they might be able to afford. But the second year, it keeps going up, so I don't know. But that was the second piece of this expansion. Well, we can expand, and when we expanded, the federal government was going to pay 100% for the first year, and then 95% of the total cost to the state the second year, and 90% the third year. Well, we're at the end of the 3 years now, so we're picking up a bigger portion of this than we did when we started, and there's no end in sight. So to answer your question about how do we handle it, there's got to be some priorities set here on who's really, who should we really be paying for? I think that's where the MCOs come in. They can look through that with a finer tooth comb than what DHS was doing, I think, because they're based off of an increase that comes from the federal. The real story is that DHS, it's $4.2 billion Medicaid budget for Iowa. That's our share. There's another $14 billion of federal money that comes to the state because of this. So, if you don't do it, you're damned, and if you do it, you're damned. If you didn't do it, you're turning down all this federal money. Now, the state can't print money like the feds do, so the feds can just, and somehow we have to have more money in the system. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do, but it just snowballs on you, and states are having a hard time struggling to get it under control. So, yes, sir.
One problem that I see, and I was serving on access to care for the elderly, and I've been on that for 3 years, and the biggest thing that scares me is that the level of care that they want to provide is greater than what the average family can provide for themselves. I talked to one woman yesterday, and she's very distraught. She doesn't think she's going to be able to go to the hospital on the weekends to get her dental work done, because if she has to go to the private office, she's going to have to wait. It's a mindset. If we're going to move all the elderly out of the nursing homes, and we want to have them be basically home-based, and we're going to have a whole level of private health nurses and that, they go in 2 or 3 times a week to help them, so we can keep them in their homes to reduce that cost. A big component they're pushing very hard for is to have the dentist have to go to those individual homes to provide the care for them, because if they are unable to get out on their own, logic is that we have to go to them. And I sit there with 14 other people that represent most of the major programs in the state that have to deal with the elderly in any way. I mean, and there's some very, very intelligent people there. But their perception is that we have to provide this higher level of care than what we provide to the general public. And that's not sustainable, because I can see one patient in a private home setting while I can see 3 in my office. I can see 3 times as much work in my office because I have the staff to do it efficiently. And so this is what we're seeing coming at us. And I've spent 3 years working on this, and I don't feel any gain. And this is a real concern, because when you go from 360 to 560, there comes a point of accountability that people need to provide for themselves. And I've got patients coming in who have $60,000 a year incomes within the family. Well, you may have a divorce, you may have a handicapped child, and suddenly that family is eligible for benefits. Well, let's see, I think that would eliminate most of our young teachers. I know that, like, for lawyers, now I think it's 40-some thousand, what a lawyer starts at. So, okay, the police, the firemen. Well, if we're gonna have all these people coming in for free care, who's gonna pay for it?
I agree with everything you said. And right now, there's only one person left standing to pay for it, and that's
And, you know, and you need to get your fellow senators and representatives. They've got to look at the reality. They're putting this on us saying, well, we're getting this free money from the government. No free lunch in this world.
exactly right. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I came from Kansas, which had the MCO system very, very similar.
Kansas?
Yes, yeah.
Let's see.
And
That's south of here, right?
yes, it is something. Yeah. Well, they had so they had something called the autism waiver, and if you were diagnosed with autism and you were on the waiver before age 5, then you could receive services. It's kind of tricky because the waiting list was 3.5 years, and you had to be on it before your 5th birthday. We had my son diagnosed at 18 months, which got him 1 week before his 5th birthday. He was off the waiver, off the waiting list. So the system there is kind of tricky, but what ended up happening was they said that he was going to receive services a week before his 5th birthday, but it took us 6 months before we ever got a phone call back or could find what services he could get, or before we could even find a service provider for anything that he needed. So my concern is that, and this is what happened in Kansas, is the politicians continuously talked about how there was a lot more people being served under the MCO system, and how a lot more people were getting services. My son would have been in that case where he was probably one of those people that counted as getting services, yet they could boast about how much money they were saving because somebody like him was never going to get any services, and there was no service providers for them. So how would we, I have a question here. How would we, or how would you guys help to make sure that that's not going to be the story that we tell in Iowa? That there is more people getting services, here's the big savings, here's the $50 million we're saving, and it's not because the MCOs have made it so tricky to navigate and they don't return phone calls, and that really nobody's getting more services, it's just a number that we're talking about. And I'm afraid politicians will end up telling that story. So.
Okay, you've asked a very good question. I would fall back to the oversight part of this puzzle, where when a person, if I have a constituent that comes in and with that sort of problem, I would go to either the oversight committee and say, here's a problem we've got out there, address it, and go directly to the MCO and find it and check, do an audit of them to see if they're abandoning people that we intended to. Like the bill I was telling you about, we did a bill to reinforce what we did the year before because DHS was ignoring it. We may have to do things like that in the startup to keep the system doing what they're supposed to do, and that's service island, so.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, under the Kansas system, was there, were there ombudsmen that were fairly easy to get to? Did they represent you in any way?
No, it's pretty tricky to navigate that part as well. Everybody that you ever get a hold of always talks about their huge caseload and those kind of things too, and that became kind of a tricky thing. The MCOs were, even the initial stages where you do have a caseworker that's supposed to work with you, that's kind of hard to figure out which MCO you should go with. Nobody walks you through the process of telling you which MCO and what provider differences there will be. And then we were left with, the answer that we ended up kind of getting from people was, we were in a situation where go find your own service provider, which is not an easy thing to do if you don't know the right agencies, you don't know the right people inside those agencies. And those agencies were so taxed that they didn't have people available. There was nobody that could provide the in-home services that we were eligible for or any of the other support services. And my concern isn't for my family necessarily, but we had 2 college-educated parents working on it. I had a wife that stayed home and worked on it full time, and we couldn't navigate that world. So I can't imagine a family that is really struggling with people with disabilities, how they could ever manage that, how they could ever make it through that system. And that's really disheartening, and I know you guys are concerned with that as well. I just would, my question really is more about how do we make sure that we don't tell the story that more people are getting served, but in reality, the only way the MCOs can save money is to provide less services to those individuals. So, and I get the cost part, I know how expensive it is, I really do understand that part too.
Yeah, it's kind of a tightrope.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm totally committed to making sure that the NCOs do what they say they're going to do, and that they don't prevent people from getting services. I think that's a concern I think everybody in this room has.
I had an email a couple weeks ago from a young lady, I don't remember where she was from, but she was making $65,000 a year. Her husband was unemployed, but they were having trouble getting food on the table. Now, I think our priorities are messed up enough. If you make $65,000, family of 4 can't get enough food on the table. We're either taxing you too much, or our priorities as a people are way out of whack. I mean, and I'll throw this out there. How many of you pay $100 a month just to watch your television? Yeah, me included. But what would Grandpa say if you told him that? Or if you had a phone bill that was $250 a month, Grandpa would turn over in his grave, So we've gotten so spoiled that we just expect all this stuff is
That family of 4 will have 4 cell phones. They'll have at least 2 color TV sets, 1 in 2 different areas of the house, but they cannot afford to keep their family.
And several pets.
That's our problem. Our whole country, our priorities have flip-flopped upside down. And rather than putting health as our #1 priority, we can't really blame the people on Medicaid for that. I mean, the whole country is facing that problem.
Hey, Mark, it's $150 a month and there's still nothing on.
$150 a month and there's still nothing on it. Exactly. Okay.
I think Mr. Dearborn.
ESPN and ESPN Classic.
I don't know about you, Mark, I've been there on Chuck Dice.
Mr. Dearborn's gonna get a rating increase.
Sorry, Chuck, I went the wrong way.
I know it is. I lost complete control.
I'm sorry.
Other questions from the floor?
I like out of control. I'll get it back to Brian.
Well, it seems to me, Gene, it seems to me you've just spelled out what the problem is that you have people who are applying for Medicaid who should not be on Medicaid. So I guess, is there an audit for those MCOs? And I'd sure like to know what MCO stands for.
Managed care.
Okay, thanks. Is there some kind of audit plan for them as well, so that they're not just, as your friend said, giving us a bunch of numbers that don't mean anything?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Gene.
Yeah, that's a good point. And is there, I think that's the duty of this oversight committee. And probably DHS's duty after this all gets up and running is they need to oversee that, the MCOs, because they're the ones that pick them. They're the ones that they've been answering all the questions. Brian brought up a good thing about the ombudsman program in Iowa. They're the only ones that had staff to answer questions. Nobody was answering the phones at the MCOs or at DHS pretty much, but the ombudsman had 15 staff people that were answering questions. So how do they answer questions? They're not experts in Medicaid at all, and yet they were the ones faced with the problem of trying to help people work their way through the system. So they gave us quite a report here a couple weeks ago. I wish I had more of the details in my head, but I don't. Maybe Ryan remembers more. They had received. Do you remember how many phone calls they had gotten? It was 260 in one day, I think, was the biggest day. I've got a laminated sheet. I asked them for just the numbers because every legislator had been getting phone calls or emails about where should I go, what number should I call, and finally David Johnson says, well, don't you have a bank of phone numbers that you could give us? And the lady says, oh yeah, we do. And so we all got the phone numbers now. At least a number to call if you have a problem with a certain bureaucrat or bureau. So I've got that with me here, I think. I took it home. My wife has a laminator, school teacher. She laminates stuff, so I said, well, laminate that thing. So if you want to take a peek.
She didn't do that at school.
I know, we also have our own copy machine. And by the way, if 179 does not go through, you lose your $250,000 supplies for teachers for the classroom as well. So, but she's retired. But if you got a problem and you need a phone number, I'll lay it up here and take a peek. But don't take it home because I'll lose it. That's why I laminated it. Make a nice thing.
I can make copies, Senator.
Okay, can you laminate?
It's not in the school budget.
Can you laminate? I'm all wound up here.
Other questions from the floor? Virginia?
I'm talking for myself, shift off of Medicaid. What's happening with the schools, and is their funding not, are they going to get just one flat amount of money, or is it going to have all these attachments to certain programs and all that sort of thing? What's happening?
So you're referring to like the categorizations that we have now?
Well, the building and the transportation and
Well,
Future leadership program.
yeah, all of those.
Well, it's all categorized. The supplemental growth, or what do we call it now? Oh, we are calling it, yeah.
SSA.
Yeah, SSA. Yeah. So I think, I'm very interested in seeing if we can make that a little more flexible than it is now for the administrators and the school boards. That's for sure. But right now, it's all going into categories, and sometimes they can't use a lot of the money that they've got sitting there in those pools. So I'm all for allowing more flexibility, because every school has different needs, and sometimes they can't get to. And Rob could probably sit here and give you a lot of information about that, much more than I have. But I think we do need to flex that up a little bit so they can use that money efficiently for their schools. That's for sure.
I think, we're set with the goal of setting the allowable growth or supplemental state aid. You realize there's a reason for that term change, because we were so ineffective in coming out with a number a couple of years ago. They decided, since it was against the law not to come out with the new allowable growth, they would change the name. And when I say they, I point the finger over at they, being the House, came up with that idea a few years ago. And that's where that supplemental state aid, which is really allowable growth for the coming year, came from. This year, the governor's recommending that we put $50 million for the teacher leadership program is included in his number, and I know Rob is aware of that. And he recommended 2.5% growth. And you probably know the rest of the story. Maybe we even said it. Since I've been talking about this all morning, I don't know whether I said it here or in audible. But the House passed 2% last year for this year. That came to the Senate about the second week. And it was, for us to deal with that, we either have to agree completely with what they sent us or not. And so the motion is to concur or not to concur. So the question was, do you concur? Which means we absolutely agree as the Senate to what the House sent us. Well, the vote failed, so we didn't concur with what they did. So it went to a conference committee, which is where it's at right now. And I think it's going to come out this week as one of the topics for one of our late sessions, so we'll see. I know the committee last week in the Senate voted for 4%. That was the majority's proposal there, so I don't know where the conference committee, they all have to agree as the conference committee, which is members from both parties in that conference committee, so for both houses. So I haven't seen that at all. Maybe Ryan has.
I don't understand why there's an increase needed. All the COLA people were told there was no inflation.
Does that mean your cable bill stayed low? I'm sorry, Rob, Chuck, I didn't. That's okay, Jen. I think she deserves an answer on that, Senator. Can you repeat the question?
I think the senator should answer that question.
I've
Thanks,
been
Jim.
told that half of this county is on COLA, but I don't think it's quite that high. But,
Half the county's on
Yeah.
Social Security.
well, the
Or
disability
something.
people and all of those that are, we were told there was no inflation, so there was no need for an increase. And then
What does that tell you about the people that said that? Who would have said it? The federal government would have said it, wouldn't they? Sure. And the federal government, guess what? They don't have any money either. They just print it, which is the scary part.
Yeah.
If there really was, they just printed some more, which is sort of a
or get it from China.
self-defaming thing to do in the first place.
One thing I'll say too in the defense of schools is that as a society, we're asking them to do more and more. I mean, our parents are asking them to raise their kids. And I think an adjustment is in order of some kind. Even though inflation is low, more regulations, we're asking them to do more and more. And I'm very comfortable with a 2.0 or 2.45 or whatever we come up with. I think it's needed.
I agree.
It is 11 o'clock. Again, we'd like to thank the Carroll Dental Associates for hosting today. The members of the Legislative Committee, if you would please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Committee meets every other Tuesday to prepare questions for these forums. And so we'd like to thank our Representative Best and Senator Sigabart for attending today as well. And we will see you in 2 weeks. And that will be held at Coon Rapids.
You know where?
Prexinger Building. The legislators might stay around for a little bit if you need to talk to them individually. And again, thank you for coming.
At least pick up more rolls on the way.